So to start, here is a glimpse of the finished product of what the sleeves will look like once they are properly set in. You can see on the wrong side of the shell fabric, I've added heavyweight fusible. I have picked up some store-bought sleeve heads, although you can just make these yourself, as well as some thicker shoulder pads. This is all just to give it more structure and a more polished professional look. You can see the dart here because it is a one-piece sleeve, and since your arms don't hang completely straight, they always naturally have a bend. To have a tailored sleeve, you need the sleeve to have a very slight bend. I'm just going to close the dart. I pin the front point so I have a visual of where to stop sewing, and then just going about making sure that none of the fibers are sticking out through the seam here that I will be sewing, and just sandwiching it, feeling it, making sure that everything is lying flat. So when I bring it over to the machine, it's easy peasy. Here we go. Just by eyeballing it, I am going towards the last pin, bringing it in to a V. I remove the pins as I go when I'm sewing a straight stitch. I just find everything to be much more polished. If it's zigzag, you can kind of get away with leaving them in. Despite the fact that these are silk pins, my Juki is my baby, my sewing machine, and I do not want to destroy her. She has been with me for going on 15 years now. So I treat her right so that she stays with me. So with darts, you do not backstitch at the point. That will make it a very obvious point. You just cut it so there's more thread, tie a double knot, cut the loose thread, and then we are going to press this so the seams are open. I pressed it, they're open, and now it's time to pin the sides of the seam together here. So I am just lining up the notches, feeling with my fingers, making sure that everything is aligned. I want to point out this sewing guide that is my best friend. It's just a magnet, and you can put it along the guides here on your sewing machine so that you have perfect seam allowance and you don't even need to think about it. Pretty much throughout the entire coat, my seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, so I just line it up, and there you go. And because it's so thick, it makes it extra easy with this magnet that you almost don't even have to think. You're just literally guiding it along the edge of the magnet. And like I said, I remove the pins as I go, just to keep it clean. I don't break any thread, I don't break the machine, needles, etc. Now that she's all stitched up, the next step always after stitching is pressing. And so bringing you over here to my ironing board, and I have a sleeve ironing board here that is crucial for doing sleeves, pant legs, really anything like this, because you can just slip it over and then steam it down. It's always very important to make sure that your iron is not too hot, depending on the material that you're sewing. This is an industrial iron, and I think on most irons it will tell you the level at which to heat it up for the fabric types. And so this is because it's mohair, wool, cashmere. I'm keeping it very low and just making sure that it is nice and pressed open. Because of the bulk of this fabric, I am using this fusible that's basically like a double-sided glue. Very thin. I have different widths. This is, I want to say 1/4 inch. I probably should check as I'm making this video. But there we go. It's a 1/4 inch. That's definitely a 1/4 inch. And just slip it underneath and iron it back on. It will melt and adhere to both sides of the fabric so that the seam allowance isn't flapping away. And this is more of like a comfort thing for me since I'm going to be wearing it. I just don't want anything unnecessarily bulky. The next and very crucial part to putting a sleeve in properly is creating gathers. Typically, you're going to have gathers right at where I am pinning here. If you just kind of lay it flat, lay the seam allowance in the center, and see where the fabric naturally falls. Bringing it back over to my sewing machine, I'm going to increase the stitch length to about 4. And here we go with the guide. Now, because my seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, I'm starting the first row of stitches here at a 1/4 inch, and I will add an 1/8 inch from that when I do my second row, just so that all of these stitch lines are still going to be hidden within the seam allowance when I add this to the shell of the jacket. So now that you have the stitches done, and it's easier to control if you do 2 rows about an 1/8 of an inch apart from each other rather than just one. So now that you have them done, it's easiest to pull both bobbin threads. Just if you kind of guide your finger along, make sure that the thread does not snap. You're just creating a very slight gather to give the sleeve head a more curved shape so it really lays properly on your shoulder. And once you have it all gathered up, you can take it over to the ironing board and kind of press this so that you don't have really hard gather lines when you stitch it into your jacket. So now I have the first sleeve set in, but you can see it's kind of just hanging there, and I definitely want it to be a bit more polished and tailored. So I'm pinning in the sleeve heads now and just lining them up along the edge of the seam allowance of the sleeves. I'm then going to take it over to my machine and stitch that in only a 1/4 inch so it doesn't interfere with the stitch line of the actual sleeve. And already you can see a difference. You see this looks much more tailored and professional rather than just kind of sagging and hanging down the way that it was before. However, I still want a bit more structure. I have a vision in my mind based on a coat that my mom had from the late 80s, early 90s with these massive shoulder pads, and I just thought it was gorgeous. So it's important to find the halfway mark here. So it's easy just to fold, pin to leave a little mark so you can have an indication to yourself where the halfway mark is at the top and at the bottom here. When you're inserting shoulder pads into the shoulder, it's important that the curves go opposite. So the curve of the armhole here is the opposite way that the curve of the shoulder pad is, because when you put it on, that's how it's going to lay. Now, I am just, again, pinning here along, starting at the center point where you have the seam at the shoulder right there, flipping it so that this center point of the shoulder pad at the back that I've marked, I can just lightly tack to the shoulder seam. And I'll give one pin to the front and one to the back. And get my hand sewing needle and thread prepared. because now I am going to stitch the shoulder pad along the seam allowance and do it about a 1/4 inch in, and very lightly. You don't want to pull tight. You do not want to change the shape of the shoulder pad. This is just to secure it in place so it's not sliding around and it is where it needs to be. And like I said, I'm just going to give this a 1-2 stitch just to very lightly tack this down in place so it doesn't slide around. So now that that's sewn in, it's tailored, it's polished, it's professional. And this is also the exception of the pressing rule. Once you have a shoulder pad in there, you really don't want to touch an iron to it. Depending on the fabric, you may want to use some steam, but on this particular fabric, I do not. So here she is, the finished jacket. I was inspired by 1920s cocoon style coats. I really, really loved the silhouette and wanted to kind of just feel like I was being wrapped in a blanket. So here you can see at the back yoke the way that it drapes. But especially when I walk in it, because it's floor length and the way that the shape tapers in at the bottom, it gives it that classic silhouette with a couple of modern updates. Don't forget to like and subscribe and even comment and let me know if there's anything else that you'd like to see. See you soon.